Now we're going to try to use our closing plenary to end on a positive note on fortifying the future of the Caribbean economy. We'll focus on how to create economic expansion that is inclusive, sustainable, and diverse. And I hope you will be as impressed as I am by our panelists. And I'll say a few words about this at the end, but I hope you will leave here believing we can do better and that we should all be a part of the effort. I would like to invite to the stage the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mottley, the newly elected Governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Albert Bryan, the Executive Chairman of Banco Popular, Richard Carrión, and the founder and CEO of Piloto, 151's, Sofia Stolberg. Let's give them all a big hand. So, let's start with a general question, and you can all say whatever you want to say, and then I'll follow up. But the economy of the region is estimated to grow 2.1% in 2019. That means there are opportunities here to actually execute policies and initiatives to make the growth more inclusive and hopefully more rapid. This is important, I think, in any time, but especially when people are still living with the aftershocks of what happened. So I'd like to ask each of you from your own experience, how, first of all, what's the most important thing that can be done to ensure that growth continues, and how can we make sure that the growth is actually felt in a positive way in the lives of people that in one way or another you all represent? And I think I'll start with you, Madam Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak on behalf of the Caribbean community, which, as you know, is a range of countries running from Belize and Jamaica in the north and Bahamas right down to Suriname and Guyana on the South American continent. For us, growth has been tepid for the best part of the last 3 decades in a way that it wasn't where in the early years after independence we were able to grow quickly. Part of the difficulty has been a number of the obstacles at a global level that we've had to confront, from trade liberalization and WTO measures, restructuring of domestic manufacturing sectors, environmental challenges, and those have become even more and more of concern because what they've done is to displace much of the growth that has taken place. I think you're aware of what happened in Dominica and Barbados year before last. And in other countries in the region. We are at a stage now where potentially the growth can be there, but it's not going to be inclusive unless, one, we start to unlock capital first and foremost from within the region and match it with foreign capital from outside. If we simply bring capital from outside, we're only going to impose on the region transient capital that will remit dividends in the short and medium term. Within the Caribbean community, there's about $47 billion in savings. And right now, if those savings are left in the commercial banks, they attract a savings rate of 0.1%. Yet, businesses are borrowing at 7, 8, 9, 10% throughout the region. And the one thing that is part of our patrimony is renewable energy. We have a moral obligation to unlock renewable energy for the benefit of Caribbean people. and to unlock the investments that are possible. But we've got to create the instruments. We've got to create the instruments that then can be married with foreign capital to be able to make this a real possibility. In my own country, we've set a target of 2030 for a fossil fuel-free economy at best, or a carbon-neutral economy at worst, because we don't have a choice. We've seen our coral reefs die, yet our maritime space is 400 times our land space. But we've allowed over the decades our coral reefs to die with consequential changes in our marine life and in coastal erosion, and yet tourism is our primary source of business. So we don't have the luxury of time anymore in the region. We have to cut across beyond the Caribbean community to the wider Caribbean, and perhaps the environmental challenges that we've faced in the last 2 years show us that the hurricanes don't know French, Spanish, or English, or Dutch. They just know the island masses and the land masses in its way, and we have to be able to deal with scale. One of the things that I hope will come out of this initiative, and using your influence, sir, is that hurricanes don't only affect the Caribbean, they affect coastal states in the United States of America. And whether it is Texas, whether it is Louisiana, whether it's Alabama, all of the states, we need to be able to create as large a pool as possible, because the principle of insurance is a diversification of risk. And if we continue trying to reinsure with small groups of people, we're not going to have premiums brought down such that it makes sense for us to even be able to insure in the first place against risks that are astronomical, and for a battle that we didn't start, but for which we are on the front line of the world.
Well, as usual, you have something interesting to say. And the only thing I want to say about that is, if we want bigger insured pools, then the leaders of the region will have to agree on uniform standards so that the insurers can write policies that can be complied with.
That's what we're trying to do now.
But I think you're absolutely right. I think it makes a lot of sense.
That's what we're trying to do now in CARICOM within our own region, but we realize that that's not going to be big enough. And those common standards and platforms have to be agreed upon at the state level in the United States of America, plus across the different countries, some of which are French territories, British territories, and some of which are independent.
It's that one of the reasons that I don't like the way our health system is organized in America, that in any given year, 80% of the costs will be claimed by fewer than 20% of the people. But if you have a small pool, you're always hedging against the year you get a disproportionate number of the 20% in your pool, which means on 4 out of 5 years you will pay more than you should, and maybe a lot more depending on how small it is. The same thing's true for getting these small islands, and why there should be uniform resilience standards and building standards and resistance. But thank you very much. I always say this, but for those of you who are American citizens who are here, Barbados is the only place outside the United States our first president, George Washington, ever visited.
That's true. That's why more Americans should come and see it.
And you know, the guy always did have good judgment. He was a smart guy. So, Governor Bryan, I know you were excited when you got elected, but it must have finally dawned on you you have to do the job.
Yeah, that became evident quite quick. Thank you again for inviting us, the Virgin Islands, because I feel like I have all 4 of our islands here with me. And when we talk about coming into less than chaotic, I can't say it's chaotic, the aftermath and the recovery of a hurricane, while we have some serious problems in the Virgin Islands, there is so much opportunity in front of us. And when I visited other small islands, we're not blessed with having all of those opportunities that have been extended by FEMA and by HUD and other coordinating federal agencies that are contributing to our recovery. But when you talk about resilience in the Caribbean, For decades, when in the Caribbean, we've always seen our commerce come off of a plane or off of a cruise ship. And we have been ignoring, for the most part, that there's another way that has been created for commerce to come to the Caribbean, and that's the internet. Technology has greatly improved our access to the world, and because we are so small, tiny little drops of commerce off the internet are huge gallons of water for these islands. But we have not really transitioned. We're still in a conversation about agriculture, which has waned somewhat in the Caribbean. But when you think about how the American economy and here in the West, how we've transitioned into really service and technology, we have not created knowledge centers in the Caribbean. We have not invested in the kind of way that drives innovative thinking that are going to create the kind of intellectual properties that are going to drive revenue for years to come. The other thing that it builds resilience, that it takes years in order for you to get a hotel back together, or for you to get an attraction together, or for you to reestablish cruise line routes. But immediately after a storm, if we wire our communication system properly, you have immediate commerce. People are able to communicate. You can find people more easily in a storm. Those are the things that we want to do. We want to make people realize that while we spend millions and millions of dollars developing athletes, they work for people like Mark Cuban, who has created an idea and generated tremendous amounts of income. If we have in the Virgin Islands some of the largest connections. We connect North America and South America with fiber optic cables, and we have a tremendous opportunity to build a virtual network there that can drive e-commerce, do data storage, but we don't have the people. And the good thing about our island, especially St. Croix, is that we lost so many people in the last 10 years, whether it was the downturn in the economy, the loss of the oil refinery, or the storm, that we have the room for expansion. And as we're usually pretty leery about people coming to the islands, but if we have the ability to attract earners, and you talk about the good part of the global warming, the good news is that it's negative 27 in Chicago now. People want to be in a warm place. And we have that. And if we have the amenities that support them in that warm place, that's a huge opportunity for us to not only grow our economy in terms of people who are participating in local commerce, but people who are bringing in revenues and providing services to people worldwide. And that's the way that we're pushing. So we're investing in our education systems that are being rebuilt, and then making sure that people feel comfortable on those small islands with the healthcare and infrastructure support that we need.
Thank you. Richard, what are the main positive prospects for small business in the aftermath of all this? And what's the role of the banking sector?
Well, first of all, thank you, President, for having me here. It's truly an honor to be on this stage. And I'm happy that we're talking about the Caribbean. I'm reminded many years ago I was in Jamaica. I was at a friend's house, and he had Michael Manley over, arguably one of the best statesmen to come out of this region. And I was telling him how similar in size, in latitude, in population, in topography, Puerto Rico was to Jamaica. And he said something to me that always stayed in my mind. He says, yes, but we look to Elizabeth and you look to Isabella. And it's very true. Even 300-400 years later, the cultural and economic bonds really have us scattered. There is no Pan-Caribbean bank, to my chagrin. There is no Pan-Caribbean airline. There is no Pan-Caribbean telecom company. There are so many barriers amongst us, and we're so close. I dare say, St. Martin probably has more visitors from Paris than they do from San Juan. So this is an obstacle that we need to focus on, so that there truly can be one Caribbean instead of 4 or 5 Caribbeans, and that we can create, as Frank was was saying during lunchtime today, as we can create a more potent offer for more people to come down. Opportunities, I think we have to look at there are different problems in different islands. I think the one problem we all share, and we spent a lot of time talking about it, is clearly energy. And we need to get resilient, renewable, and definitely lower cost energy. The governor can tell you that they're paying 57 cents a kilowatt hour in the Virgin Islands, and that is just a terrible burden, not only on industry, but more importantly, on the parts of the population that can least afford it. So I think, energy is going to be an area where we need to focus on and try to learn from each other and try to see what we can share there. Clearly, tourism will be a growth area, and then we each have to specialize in different things. We see healthcare as an area where perhaps Puerto Rico can serve as a hub for certain things, but there are different. It's a very heterogeneous zone, the Caribbean. We need to try to work together to make it as much a one Caribbean as we can, but we also need to respect the fact that every island has its different problems, its different stages of development, and we need to move forward there.
I wish more bankers gave speeches like that. That was good. I will say more about it in a minute, but I want to give Sofia a chance to talk. You and your brother were born and raised in Old San Juan. And you founded Piloto, the first, what we would call like a small business incubator, an entrepreneurial incubator, to provide a growth platform and a place for people to work for young entrepreneurs. It's really true that if you can get them funded and started, new entrepreneurs can change the economic landscape of nearly anywhere. So tell us what you think the best opportunities are. What's the best ideas you've seen in the work you do? Why are you upbeat about the future?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's really an honor. I would say, for me, the future growth of the Caribbean is really tied to entrepreneurship development. We need entrepreneurs, and especially high-growth entrepreneurs, to create the job opportunities and to create the type of economic growth that will really sustain economic growth in the long term, right? So how that happens is really a function of how strong your entrepreneurship ecosystem is. And here in Puerto Rico, we've seen a very good development of the entrepreneurship ecosystem over the past 5 years. 5 years ago, there were not nearly as many support organizations for entrepreneurs at every single stage of development. We didn't have as many events in the ecosystem. There weren't as many startups moving down to Puerto Rico to try and scale from the island to the world. And so all of that has been changing. We're seeing now that companies and startups are raising even upwards of $1 million. That's something that never happened before. And the interesting thing is that our ecosystem, I would say, is still as strong as it was before the hurricanes hit. Of course, there's a very big difference. Probably 40% of businesses died as a result of the hurricane. But those that are still alive today proved just how resilient they are. And they not only proved how resilient they are, they're ready to scale, and they're ready to take their companies global. And that's what we need more of here on the island. So I'm not a big fan of choosing winners or sectors, right? I think that entrepreneurship and high-growth entrepreneurship can come just about from anywhere in the world and from any sector. It could be agriculture, it could be healthcare, it could be fintech, it could be anything. But what we are seeing is we are seeing entrepreneurs being much bolder about their decision-making. We're seeing them much more willing to take chances. We're seeing them betting on new opportunities and obviously on new technologies in terms of clean energy, in terms of blockchain, in terms of telecommunications. And what that's happening in our ecosystems here in the Caribbean is that it's providing a test bed as well for this type of next generation technology, which we didn't have before. We have a unique opportunity to be that testing bed for hurricane preparedness and for resilience moving forward. And there are a few key sectors where we can really, as a region, as an entire region, take off and provide world-class entrepreneurs in these areas. So I would say that I'm very keen on enabling everyone to become an entrepreneur, of course, to providing the kind of support at every single level that allows entrepreneurs to not only start a business very early on, a micro enterprise, but also to continue growing along that pipeline in order to create that high value and to create the jobs that we want them to create. And I think that the timing is now. It's never been a better moment to be an entrepreneur.
Are the people you house and start off, are they more likely to get a very small loan than people that just walk up to a bank cold turkey?
Financing is hard in the Caribbean. Richard will be able to tell you that, right? Traditional financing is hard. But for the first time, we're seeing a lot of different angel groups forming, a lot of investment coming down to the island to, of course, take advantage of the tax incentives, but also to take a look at our startup scene. And that's a really good sign. When you
What's
have
the average loan, would you say, for the people that go through your program?
So the people that come through our program are more seasoned entrepreneurs. They're not very early stage. So they may be early stage in terms of their technological development, but they've probably already raised a Series A. So they're entrepreneurs that are at the cutting edge of technology and their fields, and they're not looking for that traditional finance loan. They're more looking for either growth capital or institutional investment in terms of angel financing or even, a Series A or Series B round.
I think what you're looking at is probably in the $25,000 to maximum $50,000 range. We have a program where we actually do grants for small
And has it been
businesses.
successful?
Very successful. We're very happy with it.
Poor people pay back, don't they?
No, I mean, if they're successful, they're very grateful, I'll tell you that.
I think that if we realize that the point Richard made about unlocking to one Caribbean and unlocking the capital across the region. We have a young Barbadian, for example, who has designed a battery that can extend the shelf life of batteries for PV panels from the traditional 5-6 years to the 25 years of the panel. Now he's now looking for capital. If he can get that and patent it, and he's already attracted some initial ones because he's based in London, that's going to make a major difference to the price of energy and the PV panels and the opportunities for investment and returns in renewable energy. We have other persons, for example, in the region who are on the cutting edge of trying things, but there's a mismatch between talent and capital, and it's a very unforgiving region, especially from the traditional commercial banks.
You know what is interesting about that, though, is that most of us, and I know all of us probably, offer some type of tax incentive. And what we've done at home, and we haven't been very successful at it, is we gave an additional tax incentive if you invest in local businesses. So there are some people that participate in our programs that create a capital pool for those business ventures. But it's hard to access because it's not organized like a bank. But what I would really love to see is to have a panel of venture capitalists that exists in these programs, because they're looking for things to put their money in as well. But it's hard to find them. So connecting investors with people who have great ideas, and then the centers that you have in your business, Sofia, that the ability to get entrepreneurs together so they lend their services to one another and they have create businesses worth capitalizing. That's a huge challenge as well for us because it's such a small economy.
Absolutely, and I would say, you mentioned tax incentives. We all have tax incentives, and that's part of our growth strategy. But that can't be the panacea. that can't be the solution to our economic growth story moving forward. That's a Band-Aid, and the tax incentives expire at some point. So what do we do in the interim to make sure that when we have those tax incentives, when we're able to lure world-class entrepreneurs to our ecosystem, that we're able to have the knowledge transference that we need, that we're able to get those entrepreneurs to support our local ecosystem, to go to the meetups, to hire people, to train them, to bring some of that entrepreneurial mindset to them so that when they're gone 15, 20, 30 years from now, there's still locals that are becoming entrepreneurs themselves, that are taking that knowledge and creating real sustainable value for our economy.
In other words, reversing the industrialization by invitation model of the 50s. And that's part and parcel. The development model has to change in the region. We were satisfied to be able to educate 30–40% of the population and let the others come along. That cannot be. As the governor just said, we have a benefit that technology removes the hindrances of size and geography. And we literally have to invest in the re-education of as many of our people such that each one matters. But equally, the hidden secret of the Caribbean is that we're underpopulated. If you look at Barbados, Barbados is 430 square kilometers. Singapore is about 670. Singapore is 15 times our population. You look at Guyana. Guyana is the size of England, Scotland, and Wales. They have 65 million people. Guyana has 780,000. Suriname, larger than the Netherlands that has 17 million. Suriname has 580,000. I can go on and on and on. We have not changed the discussion, we've not changed the development model, and we've not removed ourselves from being able to distinguish, as you said, between Elizabeth and Isabella. And therefore, that colonization of the region has put us on development paths that has not maximized our economic resources in the way in which it can. And we need to have a different conversation. And I must say to you, Mr. President, part and parcel of our problem in the region is that the region has been invited on numerous occasions to pursue paths. And then when they get good at it, the developed world says, nope, stop, change, we're not allowing you to do that anymore, as has happened with financial services. And part of the difficulty for us is that we continue to be unequally yoked in a global discussion. We have finance talking to treasury, state talking to foreign affairs, security talking to security, but leaders don't talk to each other. So you're unequally yoked in the conversation, and therefore those matters that affect development cannot be pursued, and then we complain that it's a breeding ground for terrorism or that there's underdevelopment. It can't work. Or that we're not benefiting collectively in how we can fight climate change and the worst elements of it. So I think that now is an opportunity for us to reset the development agenda in a major way, and I really do think that part of the reason why I'm here and not home is because I think your intervention at this stage can open up the eyes of those whose eyes need to be opened up, that you have to change the development discussion in the hemisphere. And what is happening in Venezuela is just another example. We are neither for Maduro or against Maduro. We are neither for Guaido or against him. But guess what? We stand to suffer if there is foreign military intervention in Venezuela tomorrow. And even though we talk about the humanitarian crisis, which we know is real, the bottom line is that there are still 26 million people who have been left in Venezuela after the 3 million have left. And can any kind of intervention without dialogue lead to any kind of stability that will ultimately be to the benefit of the Venezuelan people or to us in the southern and eastern Caribbean?
Well, that's a good place. Let me just ask you all to think about this. I want to try to marry what you've all just said. You say we need a common strategy for dealing with development and climate change, right? You say we're still caught between Elizabeth and Isabella. It's actually more complicated than that. It's like a fractured mirror. I mean, one of the things I've tried to do for a long time is to support anything that would bring more green energy to the Caribbean because you have the highest electric rates in the world, and it's insanity. It undermines everything you're trying to do. But the IDB, for example, will guarantee finance projects in big wind and solar operations in Central America, but a lot of the Caribbean countries don't qualify. They're part of the United States, or they're, part of another European country, or they're, all of that. So there's all these problems. And the reason this is super important that we get right now is that the last hurricane could be the canary in the coal mine, sort of, that it could be a lot worse. If you study the climate prediction maps, they say the worst places to be for climate change immediately are in the hottest, driest places on Earth. Like there's one place in Afghanistan, 3 in Algeria, several in the Middle East,
I can help
one in
you.
Ethiopia.
I can help you.
Huh?
The map that they presented at the UN in the Bloomberg panels last October haunts me every night. It's the Arctic summer sheets, the Antarctic summer sheets, and something called coral islands. And coral islands are these islands.
Yeah, but that's all I'm going to finish. Then they say, after that, the most vulnerable places on Earth are the Caribbean and the isolated Pacific Island nations.
That's it.
The isolated Pacific Island nations can stand even less water elevation because they're lower to the ground,
That's
even
right.
in the Caribbean countries. But we are at risk here because of the melting of the ice cap on Greenland and the North Pole. And most people don't believe it now because we got this unbelievable cold wave going. But that's also going to get worse because if it all melts and flows in the North Atlantic, it will blow up the Gulf Stream, which is what makes Northern Europe and the northeast part of America and Canada habitable in the winter. So we have to worry about this here. Now, so go back to what Richard said, and go back to what you said. The first thing I asked the governor after I met him was, I said, I really love the Virgin Islands, but we need net metering so we can convert more quickly to green energy, and I guess the utility will fight you thinking we're going to drive it bankrupt, but we need it. And so we're all talking about this, and yet not the IDB, not the World Bank, nobody, there's not one central place that could say we have a Caribbean emergency. We've got a Caribbean opportunity. And we don't even need a lot of money. We just need loan guarantees to keep interest rates down to make sure that we can make this transition in a fast way. And so Richard just said the same thing. And we need some sort of common market. You say there's not enough people here. I agree with that, by the way. And this is why I'm at odds with some people in the United States on this immigration issue. Our birth rate among native-born Americans is down to 1.8 children per family. That's below replacement, just like every European country. And the one thing that happens, on balance, this is a good thing, but it's something we have to think about. In every place in the world, once you get all the girls in school and the women in the workplace and the standard of living reaches X percent, the birth rate drops. So we don't want any more immigrants. I don't get that. So you forgive me, but we're all going to face this, but there's a potential to grow here.
Yep.
And everything about it requires a common resilient strategy and a common clean energy strategy. That is, you've got to model the behavior you want the world to follow, not to bury you in water, and you have to be resilient in the 20 or 30 years it's going to take for us to be where we need to be so you don't get destroyed when the next storm comes. And we need a common set of financing opportunities and rules. Do you agree with that?
100%. And I think we have to do more of bringing people together, talking about energy, talking about development models, talking about financing, and share success stories and what we've learned from the failures, because I think that's the only way. You know, there are small markets, but altogether, it's not a small market. It's a much bigger market.
If you go to a decentralized, stabilized, sustainable energy system, there's not a place here that can't drive utility rates down and productivity up and income up to create more jobs, to create more investment, to bring more people. I mean, I was thinking about that the last time I was in the Virgin Islands, you know, that Hillary and I vacationed there twice when I was president. I was trying to do my part.
Thank you.
And I don't think anybody ever had before. But I thought, God, this is so beautiful, but there aren't many people here because there aren't enough economic opportunities. And I met twice with all the Caribbean leaders when I was president. And we had dealt with terrible environmental problems and storms and an earthquake in Central America. And we all promised to do better, but we're not organized to do better. Yeah. And we have to have all these people. There's a lot we can do in the affected areas we're here to talk about. But over the long run, it seems to me that the economic opportunities are staggering if we can share our resources and share our vulnerabilities.
There's a major problem, sir, and let me point to it. I think the Inter-American Development Bank is trying its best through IDB Invest and through the formal bank itself. It'll be constrained with the overseas territories or the dependent territories because they're not independent, but it can still do work. With the World Bank, we have a bigger issue because the World Bank, if you're graduated, once you become a middle-income country and you're graduated, you can't access capital. So in the case of Barbados, when I became Prime Minister 7 months ago, we were the third most indebted country in the world. Highest debt to GDP after Japan, after Greece. We've gone into an IMF program. We're in the middle of restructuring. But I can't borrow a cent from the World Bank today, even though I'm precluded from borrowing from the international capital markets because of the debt restructuring. And it's largely because we are categorized, like Bahamas, as a middle-income country. Now, you are effectively condemning these countries back into poverty if you don't unlock access to concessional capital. And that's part of the development discussion that has to be done.
I agree with that.
At the political level, however, we can still make room for our private sector entities to come cross-border to unlock some of the capital, because the reality is, as in Puerto Rico, as with us, governments have no fiscal space. So we've got to use non-fiscal measures to allow our private sector to access capital. If not, they're not going to grow.
I just want to check this with Richard, but this is real important. I believe it's true that if we can get let's suppose there was some entity that everybody else agreed to back up or something. The IDB would be the best because they move the quickest.
But we wouldn't be
Yeah,
eligible for IDB funding.
What?
Or we wouldn't be eligible for World Bank funding or IDB
Yeah, so
funding.
but if the IDB, but you're not, but if the IDB, let's say, could guarantee a loan, an energy loan in the Virgin Islands or in Puerto Rico or anywhere, let's just say, and then the Treasury, the World Bank, others would agree to, back them up. Even the governments wouldn't even have to borrow the money. Then banks could loan the money to the developers, and we'd be putting people to work, driving down power rates, setting an example for the rest of the world. And people would say, oh my God, what is going on in the Caribbean? I mean, you could move this thing like no tomorrow. But you have to have a competitive way of financing it. As far as I know, nobody has defaulted on one of their clean energy loans that they have guaranteed.
No, and we can create those instruments for our population to invest. We got 47 billion US. God knows what you have in savings here in Puerto Rico or in the Virgin Islands. Where are the instruments that ordinary people can invest in to help finance their own development?
I also think that,
I
at
agree
least
with
in the
that.
case
That's a whole different issue. But to do that, we have to identify
What are the structures?
a mechanism that everybody will support. You can't say, well, I'm sorry, no matter what kind of mess you're in, we can't help the Virgin Islands because you're part of the United States.
Yeah.
You got to get the government to do it. Or we can't, help a French colony or a Dutch colony or this is all crazy. There needs to be a regional approach here. And the amount of money we're talking about is peanuts. This is all legal and political gobbledygook stuff. I mean, it's just not that much money.
I think the other thing that comes into play, though, I mean, especially for us in Puerto Rico, there's a distinct difference between the big island economies and the small islands.
Absolutely.
I mean, Puerto Rico has 3 million people, so they clean up on economies of scale. And now when they have the we discussed for a long time having an interconnectivity as far as a cable to Puerto Rico, not really for power supply, but for power resiliency in the case of a storm, just like we just had, and being able to get our rates down a little bit and having the disruptions. But when you talk about going to Tortola and Anegada and Virgin Gorda, they in the BVI, there's so much loss because you lose these economies of scale when you're going from this small island to a small island. It costs us incredible amount of money to have the infrastructure set up 3 times the same infrastructure that would probably serve, to your point, 2-3 times as many people on each island. So that's killer for us. And then when you go to foreign non-U.S. Affiliated islands, it's a whole other thing again. So the beautiful thing about the Caribbean is that we are so diverse, right? But there's less that separates us culturally, right, from island to island than the people who visit us. And that is part of the barrier of getting together, because the Spanish Caribbean is a whole other entity. And most people from the Caribbean don't realize that there are more Spanish-speaking people in the Caribbean than there are English, because there are more English islands, but the Spanish ones are bigger. I mean, from here to Haiti, which suffers from such poverty, and Santo Domingo, there's not that much space either, but there's no connectivity between these 2 islands.
I think we have to work again on these kinds of pan-Caribbean solutions that will break down these barriers. What you suggest about a financing entity, I know IADB would love to take that role. They just can't. I mean, I know the head of IADB. He's my colleague, he's my friend, and I know he'd love to do that. But if we can focus on that problem, that's one structure. The other, probably energy, is probably the area where we most need to collaborate and learn from each other. So, in terms of calls to action, I would say, those are 2 areas that
I agree. I'm really going to try to spend some time on this, because there are very good historic reasons for why we're all governed the way we are and how that, but it doesn't make any sense today. You can't tell me that the Caribbean has the highest electric rates in the world, and it's one of the 2 most endangered areas from climate change. And I'm really sorry, but the quickest way to fix it, it's just not possible because of some jurisdictional requirement designed in the dark ages for a world that doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't make any sense, especially since you're not talking about that much money. If you look at all the money these groups are pushing around here, this is peanuts. We're talking about mostly loan guarantees for private investors that will lower power rates and make them money. This is crazy.
I mean, for us too, I think
you can tell I don't have strong feelings about this. I'm sorry.
The opportunity that we have, I think, is to in the rest of the world, people are not used to managing their water. Even when FEMA came to the Caribbean, to St. Croix and St. Thomas, they were amazed that most people have 2,000 gallons of fresh potable water in their house, right? We manage our water supply. It's crazy to somebody who lives in Ohio or Michigan or someplace, or Florida, to think that you would manage all of your water supply. We manage most of our wastewater because we have septic tanks. Most of us are not connected to a sewer system. And during the storm, we had to manage our power because everybody, well, most people got a generator or some other form of way to manage the power, whether we're using battery, solar, generator. Well, we need to incorporate that. When you talk about building resiliency, we need to incorporate the management of power into the building of our homes and our buildings so that it's a natural thing when you're building a home so that you have your own power supply. Maybe not 100%, but at least 50 to 60%, because that is what you create wealth with in the Caribbean. You not only create resiliency, but you create that less dependence on that main power source. If we have that in a way to put people in homes affordably with their own management of their power, we have jumped incredible hurdles. And it frees up that extra income that we're paying, $400 or $500 a month per household, to pay a power company when we could be using that to invest in our neighbor's business. So you
There's
talk about capital
actually
creation.
startups in this ecosystem that are working on that, right? So we have a startup called HiveCube, and they've found a way to create affordable housing that is off the grid, that is fully sustainable, and they're rolling that out now. So there is an opportunity for entrepreneurs here as well to be part of this equation, right? In the case of Puerto Rico, yeah, we can't take advantage of IADB loans or World Bank loans, but I think that for us, it's also equally important to say the government has a role to play here. We always talk about the government, at least here in Puerto Rico, in terms of having a facilitator role, and that's great. But if we really look at the success story, economic success story of the US, and if you look at the iPhone, for instance, every single feature that makes your iPhone a smartphone, all the way from the internet to GPS to even Siri, that was funded initially by the government, right? So there is also an opportunity for at least the government of Puerto Rico, and they have done some initiatives. I have to say they have a small grants program for innovative and technology companies going on, which I applaud. But we also have to look at that alternative. Let's invest as governments in these types of innovations that will later allow the private sector and the entrepreneurs to take advantage of them, exploit them, and create extraordinary value.
I'll give you one example since you were kind enough to mention it. It took me 5 minutes to decide, over the opposition of a few of my staff when I was president, that we would immediately put GPS into the public domain. And when the Haiti earthquake hit, a lot of people are alive today because of GPS. We found them quick enough and moved the things. And the government never could have figured out how to do that on its own. We were really good at developing it through DARPA. And then the private sector was better at making the most of it once it was developed.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
an opportunity there for next generation technology.
I want to try to wrap up on a positive note. This is encouraging to me. I've been to these meetings for years, and some of the stuff that's been said today has never really been said with the level of passion and conviction that I've heard it before. But so tell us about your sustainable project. And if people here wanted to help that project, how did they find out about it? Just give me a summary of what you just got through saying about that, one of your exciting entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so we really are more of a co-working space than we are an incubator. We have all sorts of entrepreneurs at Piloto 151, and they're all united by the fact that they want to be high-growth entrepreneurs, and they also want to support their communities as well. Right, so that is great news. But one of the other things that we do is we also have a coding boot camp. So we're the only coding boot camp here on the island. And I think that even as a development strategy, it is supremely important that we start developing more tech skills in our local community. That's where all the highest demand is. It's where all the high-paying jobs are. It's the type of job that you can do remotely from anywhere in the world. You just need the connectivity, right? So if we get at least the connectivity right, then you can really do tech work from any part of the world. And I think that what we really need to do is capitalize on the fact that as a region, we are very diverse. And guess what? There's a huge diversity problem in the tech industry in the US and the world. Everybody talks about it, and they just pay lip service to it. So maybe we can take advantage of our diversity and our resources and say, let's train more of our workforce. It's the single most pressing need in our entrepreneurship ecosystem today in Puerto Rico, the lack of tech talent. If we want companies and entrepreneurs to move down to Puerto Rico and be part of our entrepreneurship ecosystem, if we want our local entrepreneurs to be able to scale from Puerto Rico and reach global markets, they need that tech talent, and we don't have it. So we really need to pay attention to that gap, to training our workforce, to ensuring that kids in school, K through 12, are learning how to code as well, and making sure that we are a part of the conversation of a new economy globally. And that, I would say, is something that we should all pay attention to. So if you are thinking about coding or want to make a career change, let us know. We're happy to help you. If you have a sister, a niece, a brother, anybody in your family that can take advantage of learning how to program, then also talk to us. But I really do think that this could be a door to further economic development for us.
So, my last question to you. I've loved our visits, not just public, but private. Suppose you and I were 30 years old at this moment. Go figure.
I would make a pact like Faust for that one.
So, you're 30 years old, and you're on the other side, but you know what you know now. And you're on the other side of the bank, that is, you're looking for financing. You could do one thing that you thought would both make a lot of money, but would create a lot of jobs, empower a lot of people, and contribute to the future of Puerto Rico. What would you do? If you had to decide today to do one thing, what would you do?
What kind of business I would be in, or probably tech, probably some kind of a startup in tech, or something in the tourism area right now.
If all of us felt that it was unfair that you had to start your career with the challenges you're facing, and we could help you do one or two things in a hurry, what would you have us do?
Wow. There's so many things you could do. For me, I think what we need right now are good people to help us rebuild our territory properly. The last time we suffered a major disaster, you know, we rebuilt, but a lot of the rebuilding that we did was done in a rush, and it wasn't done properly, and we suffered over the years. This time, we have an opportunity to do it properly, and we're so glad that we have the Clinton Foundation as a partner, and we're hoping that we see you in June in the Virgin Islands in St. Thomas for the same conference. We can discuss more with not more of our, we have a lot of Virgin Islanders out here today, but we have even more waiting for you.
Yeah. I want to thank everybody here from the Virgin Islands, especially our friend Tom Secunda and what Bloomberg's doing. You know, they've put all these people on the ground. It's great, but I hope I can be there. I expect to be there. But it wouldn't take that much to get you in a position you could do. But I'm glad to hear you say building back right, because I remember the first time when I went to the Virgin Islands after the hurricane, I saw there were two solar fields, and they were both carefully built sort of in little vales like this, you know, below the hillside, and one of them was totally intact and the other was a total wreck. And you could say, well, it could be just the luck of the wind, but it was also clearly the difference in somebody thinking about, how do I do this absolutely right? So, because this thing's going to happen again. We all got to grow up and face it. This is going to happen again and again and again. So resilience planning is going to be really important. And one of the things that I learned after Katrina hit America is that I would never have anything to do with anything in a weather zone again without deeper pilings, right? And the right sort of insulation and the right sort of a thing. You may not be able to, you can't protect 100% against any natural disaster that's strong enough, but you can do much better. I was glad to hear you say that.
We changed our codes after having two major disasters in 10 years. And those changes that we made, the homes that were built since then and have adopted the code, they were all right. We're suffering from the 60-year-old and the 40 and the 50-year-old damage. So schools that were built in the 50s and 60s and the 70s. So if we do it right, we'll be good for another 50, 60 years.
It's also to get the right materials and all that, particularly if you can make more of it in the Virgin Islands or with a partner here or somewhere else, it creates a lot of jobs.
We make rum and oil now, but we're willing to try.
Yep. Okay, you're the senior government official here, and you've given us a lot to do. If you were the Queen of the Caribbean,
She isn't?
she will
not
be.
aspire.
She will be, unless we have to draft her to go run Venezuela. And you can have us make one change. All the stuff we've talked about. We're walking out of here and we're living in a different world. What one thing would you have us do that we should support you in?
Let me say that the letters Mia don't represent either Elizabeth or Isabella, so there's no royalty in this. We need to talk. It sounds simple, but we need to talk. We don't talk. We don't talk across countries. We don't talk across islands in the region. We don't talk across governments. And as I said, people are unequally yoked. And at the end of the day, if things matter, we solve it. If they don't matter or we don't know about it, they remain a problem. We need to talk.
Well, do not underestimate this. I mean, I hate it when people like me, feeling full of passion, act like, you know, how dumb were our forebears not to do this anyway. But the truth is that in many ways, the Caribbean is more interdependent now than ever before. You're interdependent in terms of threat, principally climate change, but also other things, and in terms of staggering opportunities. And neither the threats nor the opportunities can be properly faced without much higher levels of cooperation than the current levels of organization permit.
That's right.
So one of the reasons I started doing all this stuff 20 years ago when I left the White House was to say, okay, there's got to be a way to do everything faster, cheaper, and better than we're doing it. And instead of just whining about it, why don't we just show up and go to work and see what happens? You push enough rocks up the hill, you eventually get to the top of the mountain. And so I think what you've said today is really important, but I hope when you all leave here, you will realize that what the Prime Minister has said is true. We have left behind the hard work of organized cooperation and communication. And so now you've got a set of island nations and territories organized for a world that no longer exists, trying to live and guarantee their children's future in a new world where the shared threats and the shared opportunities are far greater than ever before. And while we're waiting for better big structural changes to be made by others, we can go along each with our little repair kit and do our part to ensure greater talking and action about the threats, greater talking and action about the opportunities. That was great, what you just said. It was as good a one-sentence thing as you could say.
If I may, Mr. President, let me give the example of it. I just came back from the UN yesterday from seeing the Secretary General with the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis. We went and we asked for the meeting because in spite of the fact that Trinidad is 3 miles from Venezuela, or Barbados or Grenada or St. Lucia or St. Vincent are within 200 miles, no one has taken us into consideration and the consequences to us if there is foreign military intervention. Not the media, not the governments, not the UN. We went and we engaged because we realized that no one can do it for us. And we had to start, and we've been talking to everyone for the last 3 days because this is not about pro-Maduro or anti-Maduro or pro-opposition or anti-opposition. It is about dialogue. and it is never too late for dialogue. And the madness that we are seeing on television about one side offering and the other side rejecting goes way beyond Venezuela. And that is why I say that we need to speak. There is nothing that communication does not solve in this world, especially when people's lives are at stake or opportunities for growth are available to us.
I think that's a good way to end.
Thank you.
You know, remember, this is my sort of constant mantra, so I'll bore you to tears if you've heard it before. One of my heroes, who's nearly 90 now, is the great microbiologist E.O. Wilson, who's still alive and well and writing books in Massachusetts. He's from Alabama. And he made his way in life by becoming the world's foremost expert on ants. It was from him I learned that the combined weight of all the ants on Earth exceeds the combined weight of all the people on Earth. Now that's a lot of ants. And Wilson wrote a book called The Social Conquest of Earth, in which he defined conquest as the ability of a species to hang on in spite of repeated opportunities to be destroyed or to destroy itself. And he said the most successful species that have ever existed in the whole history of not human life on the planet are ants, termites, bees, and people. And he said the only conceivable answer, since they were neither the biggest, the fastest, or the strongest, is that they were the greatest cooperators. And he said the people are the best of all, but also the most endangered, because we're the only ones with consciousness and a conscience. And sometimes our consciousness gets ahead of our conscience. And we think we're smarter than we are. We think we can do things that we can't. And we run the risk of our own extermination for some short-term gain. If you don't have consciousness, those are mistakes you don't make. When ants are being chased by predators, or termites are threatened in their underground home by flood, or bees even are threatened by environmental standards. The honeybees are endangered, but other bee species are taking up the life. And he gambled on us. He said, and I still think we're the most likely to triumph, because in the end our conscience catches up to our consciousness and we do the right thing anyway. So when you leave here, figure out how you can do more right things anyway for these wonderful places we've all come to support. God bless you and thank you.
This plenary has concluded. Thank you for joining us to turn ideas into action.